Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm really excited to be talking about the SMART grants, especially after this morning's announcement. So just in terms of a little bit of background and context, I'm with the Open Mobility Foundation, and in 2021, we released a curb data specification. So working together with cities and companies truly around the world, we identified some of the most pressing curb management issues and developed a data standard to help cities digitize their infrastructure around the curb. And so, you know, USDOT has just announced their SMART grant recipients, and they're investing $94 million in 59 projects across 33 states to really implement technology tools like CDS and other modern approaches to a variety of mobility issues. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, and I'm very excited for our panelists to join us. So I'm going to kind of dive right into it and really kick it over to you, Ben, to talk to us a little bit more about your role at USDOT, the genesis of the SMART Grant program, and really what kind of goals the department is trying to accomplish, both with the grants program overall and the curb management focus specifically. Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Can everyone hear me okay? All right, so well, thank you for the opportunity, and really pleased to be on the stage with two leaders in, well, three leaders in our transportation system, but two leaders in really major transportation systems in our country that provide such important services. So thank you for taking the time to be with us. At the 10,000-foot view at the U.S. Department of Transportation, we're implementing the bipartisan infrastructure law. It's a $1.2 trillion law. About half that money flows through the U.S. Department of Transportation. You sort of dive into that and look at what the component parts are. It's a lot of money for state highway systems, for local transit agencies, a lot of new funding for programs and priorities that typically haven't been part of at least dedicated funding streams in our transportation system, whether we're talking about infrastructure resilience or street safety or reconnecting communities that have been separated by historic, the building of infrastructure. Among the programs that are new are a couple programs that are focused on transportation technology, and SMART Grants is one of them. And so in the grand scheme of things, it actually is pretty small, like numerically, but SMART Grants is $500 million over 5 years, which actually is this incredibly historic investment in transportation technology, smart cities. And it's part of like a kind of there's like a sister program that is another $300 million. So now is really an important moment in terms of investing in transportation technology. So I'll talk quickly, and then we can touch more on during the panel, like what we're trying to achieve with SMART Grants. I think we kind of looked at the history of, of transportation technology deployments, and I think that there have been fits and starts, and in some ways the narrative and the way people think about this issue has changed over the last 15 years. I think that if you rewind 15 years ago, there was a sense of like these sort of completely holistic, integrated deployments were going to come on down from high and completely disrupt and change our transportation system. And we learned, either for better or for worse, the hard way, that that's really not the way that this is going to work. And we need to be more focused on thinking about technology to solve specific and present challenges in our transportation system, and that's what we thought about when we started implementing SMART Grants. SMART Grants comes from the infrastructure law. Congress sets this, the statutory requirements for the program, but offers the ability to invest in activities that range from connected vehicles to traffic signals to systems level work to UAS. And so we thought about that kind of in the context of the program. So one of the important factors was this idea of how do you bring a project along at the speed that is sort of appropriate for what we've seen as like in the pace of innovation in transportation. And part of that is not to to parachute in with so much money that it's hard to think about how that, that those sort of resources can be operationally deployed. And so Smart Grants is a two-stage program. We announced $95 million, $94 million of stage 1 awards. Those are planning and prototyping grants. Each award is up to $2 million. And those grantees will have an opportunity during subsequent years to apply for stage 2 implementation grants, which will be in the range of $10 or $15 million. Now, none of these projects are going to end at that $15 million stage. We think that projects ultimately will have to transition into thinking about their own sustainable business models or formula funds or other competitive grant programs. And that's really the goal, is to use a demonstration program for transportation technology as as sort of the tip of the spear to introduce new methods that then can be applied more broadly in our transportation system. In Smart Grants, and I'll wrap up here in like 1 minute, we kind of focused on 3 priorities. One was safety, worker safety, intersection safety, and I can talk about those projects if it's of interest, but you can read about them on our website. Another one was transit innovation, and Eulois talked a lot about that this morning, all the great work that's happening in this region on transit innovation. Transit has been affected by the pandemic, and commute patterns have been affected by the pandemic, and I think now is the moment to capitalize on both a moment for reinvention, but also a moment of fortifying transit as a sustainable, safe option that can and must be central to any region. And if we lose the moment now, I think we'll regret it. The third area was the idea of using data and technology to manage our built environment. And so some of that was like a UAS and other sensor-based inspection, but a core part of it was the idea of curb management. And so we funded 9 projects across the country, including San Jose and Miami-Dade County, that are going to be using data and technology to better manage their curb. And we can dive into the topic of curb management, but it's exciting because it's a real problem, and it's a problem that everyone experiences. Not just the transportation agency, but humans, residents, everyone who exists in our communities know how complex the operations are around a curb space, and we all know that the system could be better. And so we wanted to provide a kickstart to the work that the Open Mobility Foundation has been doing for several years now, and really organizing a community of practice. And so we hope our resources help accelerate that, and we hope that this is the first stage in what will be, I think, a lot of wonderful flowers blooming across the country in curb management, but it goes beyond that, and I think we really care about implementation in a way that can define new systems and approaches in our country. So I'll stop there. Hopefully I didn't take too much time.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think, yeah, the implementation piece is what we're really excited about. It's one thing to build a standard or a digital tool of some kind. It's another thing entirely to implement it and make it work, for all the different stakeholders in a community, residents, businesses, et cetera. So that's what we're really excited to see. And what I forgot to mention is that part of this program, when we saw the Smart Grant program, when we read the NOFO, we convened several of our members. We're a membership organization. At the heart of it, over 65 public and private sector members, primarily cities, public agencies, mobility providers, technology companies, and really took a look at, okay, let's kind of rally everyone around some of their shared problem statements and really kind of align folks on tackling a similar problem with different types of technology solutions, but really with the data standard that we steward, the curb data specification, underpinning it all, or kind of at the heart of it. So so we're really excited to see it be implemented in different contexts. So with that said, let's talk about those different contexts. I'll hand it over to Eulois first to talk more about Miami-Dade's curb management program.
Sure. Hello? Okay, very good. Definitely want to thank Ben and the team at USDOT for recognizing our grant submission. This is the first discretionary grant that the county has been able to receive from the infrastructure bill. So hopefully we'll keep the trend going as we move forward for future grant submissions. But the uniqueness of our SMART grant is based off of a couple of things. One, figuring out ways to leverage the built environment that is currently happening today in downtown Miami, where we are building out our bike infrastructure and creating more dedicated bike lanes. but ultimately trying to figure out a way to leverage that infrastructure to create a unique last and first mile delivery solution that many urban areas struggle with that impacts the curbside. And so, all of our deliveries that we get, everything that we buy, conflicts with another use or demand for curbside. And so we saw this a lot with respect to COVID, where everybody was staying at home and delivering everything from clothes to food and the like at a expedited and intense trend. And what we wanted to do is figure out a way, in a future case where we're going to continue to have these more demands on the curbside, how can we, one, leverage an alternative use to actually deliver product that is utilizing the curbside, but doing it in a manner that's controlled, an environment that is beneficial to a lot of delivery companies from a business standpoint. And this is where the curbside data specification comes into play, where digitizing the curb and figuring out a way to develop a platform where you actually have the ability to pre-book deliveries and better not only manage the curb, but reduce conflicts between whatever vehicle, whether it be a bike or what have you, that's delivering those types of products curbside, with deconflicting that with the general traffic, and thereby creating a safer environment and a more efficient environment to make those deliveries occur. So I'm excited about this because I've been trying forever to get to a point where we can provide a platform for small to large businesses and small parcel companies to be able to know exactly where they need to go to be able to make their delivery, and deconflict that freight delivery from transit as well as other uses for the curbside. The other piece I'm excited about is trying to figure out a way we can bring at scale cargo bikes here to Miami-Dade County and the city of Miami. This is hopefully everybody knows what a cargo bike is. There's like two people shaking their head. So like a cargo bike, so think about a pedicab. Everybody knows what a pedicab is, right? So think about if you remove that pedicab seat and replace it with a box that can actually move parcels. That's what we're talking about. And this is a concept that exists outside of the U.S. a lot. In more European countries, there's a couple of cities across the country that are starting to use this as a way for that first and last mile cargo delivery. And we want to bring this at scale here in Miami. We've only, I think I've had DHL that's done a pilot here. But we truly feel that our terrain and the way that we can manage the curb can accelerate the proliferation of these types of vehicles to actually do this last and first mile deliveries as we move forward, all utilizing the curb in a more efficient manner. So we're excited about this, and we're excited with all the partners that helped us produce the grant and then ultimately to have it be selected by USDOT.
Thank you. All right, Ramses, bring us to the best coast. Yeah, they could throw up some visuals.
All right, there are two slides for us. But yeah, so Ramses, Madou, excited. I'm planning policy and sustainability for the city of San Jose, but I'm also the chair of the board for the Open Mobility Foundation. So Ben, for both perspectives, right? From the city, we're really excited to get this opportunity. But from the OMF perspective, right, this is roughly $16 million being invested in what we see as one of the most innovative ways that cities and can work together to build out curb data specifications that immediately have impact across the entire country. There are two slides for the folks in the back. Are you able to throw those up? So from the city perspective, right? Our downtown is growing a lot right now. We've got about 20 million square feet under permitted to grow. See how much of it actually comes with the economic cycle, but there's an immense amount going on. And I don't need to kind of stress the things that were just brought up, but basically, we don't have active management of our curbs. We have signs up on the side of the road that the policies were put in place at some point, and we track them in an ad hoc GIS layer that may or may not actually be up to date, and is certainly not communicated out to service providers or parkers and things like that. And so we really want to elevate our knowledge and our expression of what's happening at the curb out into the world. in a way that allows us to bring curbside delivery, to enable much more efficient parking usage, and do a lot of interesting potential things. And a lot of, for us, what's going on is, let's go to the second slide. Right? By creating our curb inventory, right, really understanding what's actually out there, and then getting utilization information, right, these are the two things that we're really accomplishing. Really base stuff, right? This is like just getting that actual digitization of the system so that we can actually start managing in the digital world. What does that enable, right? And we have ideas as to where it's going to go, but what we actually know is we don't actually know all the things that are going to happen yet, which is a really good thing, right? We have some images in our minds of where this might go. One, and I can't take a claim for this, Carlos Casas Cruz came up with this analogy, that we're basically creating the open table for curbs, right? You have a space, parking space, or a delivery space, and somebody needs that space at a certain time to deliver to a certain business. Well, if a delivery company can reserve that space at that time, well, they know that their business efficiency steps up. They're also not double parking, blocking our traffic and smaller roads, right? Everybody's gaining from this, right? And so you get that. That's a somewhat simple one. But what about interesting places like where we're starting to put in bus-only lanes, right? A bus-only lane sees a bus at certain times a day every 2 minutes. Well, that curb is basically non-functional other than for those buses to go by. Right, I'm talking about a curbside lane. But let's say at other times a day where the buses only go by every 5 or 10 minutes. That's a big gap in time there that may be able to be used. And if you have an active, dynamic curb management system, you may actually be able to squeeze in a few Uber drop-offs or what, right, in a very efficient way, and use that curb space in a way that allows for the public to get the best out of it, the bus is going by in an efficient way. But then these other systems kind of playing in there, right? And so there's so many uses of the curb. And so this, for us, is an initial investment in bringing our curbs from an analog space into a digital space, and then learning what it means to be able to manage at that space. And those are some of the ideas that we're going towards.
Thank you. So I want to dive a little bit deeper into some of those concepts. One of the things that all of the recipients in OMF's kind of cohort share in common is the curb data specification. And so can you connect the dots for us? Like how is CDS relevant to your project and to this concept more broadly around digitization?
Yeah, great, thanks. So CDS, curb data specification, is an API created.
Very sexy.
Very
APIs.
Sexy. Yeah, APIs, right? So what it is a three-part program or language to express a few things. One is actual cataloging of what our curb is and where it is, right? It's a standard way for cities or whoever's managing the curb to say, these curbs are in this space with these lat longs, right? This actual geographic specification. And in those locations, these are the policies that are at play, right? That in itself is immensely valuable to many, many people, right? Again, we were already talking about freight and all that stuff, but folks like, I was talking to BMW recently, they would love to say to their drivers, this is where the parking is and this is how it works, right in their dash, right, of a car, right? So you're creating language that now many, many, many uses can soak up, right, and say this is what's happening at these curbs, and they can use that. The second part is an events management system, right? And so this looks at what's actually happening at the curb in time. So is it reserved at a certain time? Is it being, right now it's mostly looking at use, right? Is there somebody there, and what kind of use are there? And we're still going to be expanding a lot there. What kinds of events will eventually we need to define. But right now we have someone coming in and out and someone starting a parking event or not. Right? And the third one is metrics. So we're standardizing metrics reporting. What do we have? What does utilization look like? What does dwell time look like? These kinds of things, right? So this becomes a standard language for all who manage the curb. This helps cities express what they have, and what the rules are around that. This helps business and the public use that facility in an efficient way, in a beneficial way for them. And it creates a space, and this is really important, it creates a space for businesses to have an immediately scalable operation. This standard is now already being used in at least the cities that have gotten this grant. But Open Mobility Foundation is already, our other data specification, MDS, is already used in hundreds of cities, right? And so as soon as this gets a few operational pieces, this scales the second, it scales as soon as it's out there, right? And that's part of the power of the Open Mobility Foundation and getting open source data standards, right? And so that's really exciting from that perspective.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that because that was a great explanation of the benefits. But I just want to put this in context. Essentially, everything you just talked about, that one can be automated and quickly accessible to the entities that are managing the curb. This did not exist 10, 15 years ago. So as in my background, I actually had the opportunity to work for the Washington, D.C. Department of Transportation. In my portfolio was curbside management and freight and all this stuff. And let me tell you, the question I asked with respect to loading zones, because we were having severe issues where FedEx and UPS were basically having to pay, at that time, the city over $2 million a year in parking fines. And so they would fuss every single day and come to me to fuss about this. And I said, well, let's figure out a way to create a curbside management program where we started to charge for the loading zones and its use. So the first question was, well, how are we able to at least identify where the loading zones are? What's the utilization? So we can figure out if we can have the proper balancing between parking, a bus stop, and curbside loading for freight. I can do that without sending out interns from Howard University, UDC, to go and actually collect this information on the field. And so fast forward to where we are now, having this platform is going to be monumental because, one, the people that are responsible for setting those curbside policies will actually have the data that's defensible to make those proper changes and to make sure that that curb is operating as efficiently as possible. So as one of, it's amazing being in that world and then, getting to a point now where this has real utility across the board and it can really change the dynamics of how curbside is being managed.
And that scalability exists on the private sector. This sound is wild, guys, sorry. That scalability also is beneficial on the private sector side as well. That's, I worked at a micromobility operator before the OMF, and it's same type of situation where, cities were requiring data as part of operating permits, and the only way to provide it before MDS was in Excel files. So, you can, once you build to a standard, you can then shift those bright, smart young people who are pulling Excel sheets and get them doing things that are more beneficial from a business perspective. So anything to add from you, Ben, on the kind of the curb data specification piece of it, or even the role of standards more broadly in these programs? Sure.
The people talk about the U.S. model of like 50 states being this idea of laboratories of democracy, and I think I've heard analogies of that of, we're a big country, have a lot of cities and communities, and so we have this ability to sort of be laboratories of innovation. But the problem is, I think that we are on an issue like this, but I would argue like kind of in transportation generally, we are we're sort of targeting like. We're not building the baseline infrastructure in order to enable the laboratories of innovation to flourish. And I think that we sort of assume that, well, let's just let everyone go do their own thing. So like if it's talking about micromobility, it's just, okay, well, Miami-Dade County is going to have their own standard for how they're going to collect this data, and so is San Jose, and so is every other community. And that is, I think, that degree of like sort of hands-off thinking, while it might be perceived as like allowing for markets to form, I think actually is antithetical to the idea that markets can form around these problems. We have to create an ability for some standardization and take advantage of like this incredible diversity of communities we have in the country, but create that baseline so that everyone can operate on the same terms. And we have to flip the model of the technology providers who will be building in communities across the country and have been trying to enter, the smart cities space for 2 decades now, I think with incredible challenges. And we have to create a much more transferable and universally applicable product. And I'm glad that this is even happening at the global level. But even just looking at the US, I think that we've had this model of the way you build a sustainable smart cities style company is to get a product and then build a fortifying wall around the ability to sort of serve that product in a local market. And it's a really bad model for yielding outcomes. Because I think we want to have an ability to be portable across vendors. You want your product to be able to be applicable in other markets instantaneously. And I think that what this is doing, but also what's happening, this conversation is happening in a lot of different places. It's happening around transit data. It's happening around payments. It's happening around curb. Like building the baseline infrastructure, and whether it's USDOT grants or just collaborations happening across cities to help do that, is so critical to actually unlocking our amazing tech ecosystem where, San Jose and Miami are such rich places that are building tech ecosystems, but I would argue that they're not being channeled adequately adequately relative to how important transportation is in our economy. And I think one of the reasons is we have to build those building blocks. So we're really committed to doing that. And I think that's among the reasons why we're really excited about it. And I think that as we build that, it will yield much faster progress in this space that I know has been probably where the slowness of progress has been a frustration.
So I want to dig a little bit deeper into this, and I'm going to go off book for a second. But I think, we're seeing a high level of collaboration at this point across cities and different levels of government, and to some extent across sectors. But freight operators and fleet operators play a really big role in this. So can you guys speak specifically, at least to the programs in Miami and San Jose, about how you're engaging with all the different players and how you're getting them on board? And I don't know, what's in it for them? What's exciting in these projects?
Sure, definitely. So I have my list of partners here for our grant. So just for the sake of the crowd, we partner with Urban Health Partnerships, Park and Miami Authority, of course, OMF, Blue Systems, Autonomous, Urban Freight Lab, CityFi, and Harvard Kennedy School. And that's just an idea that we came up with, and we work with all those partners to actually develop the grant submission. Ultimately, the success of this is going to deal with how well we engage, and we hear from the operators and the actual companies that would be impacted the most and be benefited the most by what we're talking about here today. And that's your Amazons, your FedExes, your UPSs, and alike. And we're starting to already have those conversations today. I would also say those are large companies, right? Really in the freight space, about 2/3 of what gets delivered, depending on the type of freight, really are your smaller companies. There might be one person that has one specific truck, and they may actually have a contract with Amazon to make that delivery. So we also want to make sure, getting to your equity point, that we are inclusive of the industry as a whole and not just worried about the big carriers, but to make sure that we can touch those other smaller carriers that, again, are the ones that, from a localized standpoint, will take real extreme benefit from participating in the grant. So, for government's sake, sometimes we struggle with having the right, I would say, language to use and interact with the freight industry. And this is something that we want to make sure that we're hearing from them directly, and we develop the right scope and scale of the program as we move forward. So I sometimes view this as a little bit of a challenge, but it's a fantastic opportunity to make sure we're engaged from the people that are actually operating these types of services, and we make sure that we deploy this properly.
I'll add two things. One, from the Open Mobility Foundation perspective, right? We are trying to create a system that's scalable so that the larger operators want to come engage, right? A lot of the larger operators are like, look, we operate in pretty much every city in the United States. Until you're hitting a significant portion of that, it's not worth it for us to engage, right? And that's a reasonable business decision on their part, right? They cannot operate with individualized delivery management systems in every city. It would be incredibly expensive for them. This process is creating a way in which the large companies will engage with local jurisdictions in a low friction environment, right? Where when we in different cities say we have these different curb specifications, the large companies can no longer say, well, it's all so confusing and I have to go, our drivers have to read your crazy signs that may or may not be printed in a way that's even viewable from the trucks, to it's available in their dashes, right? That scalability, like we've been talking about, is one of the most valuable pieces that this could produce, right, in the freight space, right? And so we are creating the ability for the expression of local rules, local communities being able to engage with major businesses in a way that would have not been able to be done in the past. And so I'm quite proud of that. I think that that's a very incredible moment. And then for our project in particular, at the moment we're mostly focused on actually just digitizing and kind of seeing what happens after that. Our engagement is mostly going to be with actually the local businesses and residents directly on the corridors that we're digitizing to kind of tell them what's happening and start engaging with them about potential rule changes and metrics and stuff like that we would use to do that. I wouldn't say we're engaging with freight operators just yet at that level for this project. We are in other ones, but yeah.
Yeah, and we're seeing that a lot across, the cohort is, everyone's approaching it a little bit differently, and some folks are more focused on the digitization, the kind of code the curb efforts. So I want to stay on this innovation piece just for a little while longer. It sounds like we covered many of the challenges. It seems like there's more than enough to keep us all up at night. But one of the things that I want to specifically touch on is as we kind of make this shift to digitization of our public spaces and from where we sit at the OMF, we're not just thinking about curb management, we're also thinking about mobility. And so as we shift to this more digital world, how do we use that as an opportunity to do things differently? Like, how do we not just replicate the same kind of problems in a digital sense? That's a big one, but I would love if you could, each of you, speak to how you're thinking about that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll offer some thoughts on that without the curse of having to actually implement them on the local level. I think the digitization there's sort of two parts to this. One is that more efficient use of public facilities can be an expanding pie. And so you're talking about a bus-only lane that during off-peak times can be used for freight, great. If we don't have that system in place, then the pie is smaller. And so, and you can think about that in a million analogies of how digitization in our economy has unlocked the value of different assets. The example would be like if I remember this example from a negotiation class. There was an egg, and there were different buyers, and each buyer wanted a different part of the egg. Someone wants the shell, someone wants the white, someone wants the yolk. Well, if you don't have a system for communicating about what people want and how much they're willing to pay, you're just going to sell the entire egg to the highest bidder. But if you actually have a conversation about what value proposition each component of the egg provides, then you sell the shell for its value, you sell the white for its value, and sell the yolk for its value. I think that that's what we're trying to do with our public space. And the reality is that when we digitize the curb and a restaurant needs to get deliveries and maybe the status quo feels like they're working for them, and maybe there'll be some friction with sort of modifying a system, but what happens when they can use the space that was created to put an outdoor cafe in, and now their restaurant actually has more seating and they can expand their business? And I think that's what it's about. And so I think that's like the grand opportunity that we have. But then the second thing, and this is like once you expand the pie, well, what do you do with the pie? And I think we can't ignore the fact that transportation is really a values-based enterprise, and that we're going to have to make decisions about how we leverage public space to advance the values that we want. And and Eulois was talking about some of the efforts to make major transit investments in this region. Ramses is talking about bus-only lanes. I mean, that's happening across the country. The idea of building dedicated space so that people can move more quickly, more people can move more quickly per vehicle mile. Like, that's a values decision that is really good for equity, it's really good for climate, it's really good for safety, it's good for communities. It really is like a amazing win-win-win. And so that's an opportunity to think about public space for those values. And I think that systems like this allow for more reliability of, say, transit-only lanes, where we can actually make sure that they're available and have a way of talking about that. And so I would say let's expand the pie, and then let's figure out how everyone gets a slice that was as big or bigger than their slice was before.
Yeah, sure. So I think the benefit of what we're talking about in terms of how we can use not only the grant but the outcomes of the grant will get us to a position where we can make different decisions based off of actual, real, reliable data, which we can use as information to make that decision, which in this curbside management space, it's very unique, right? So there's no modeling for curbside at this point, because there hasn't been a platform that's been able to effectively collect the proper data and understand the use and the utility of the curb. So, in terms of, how would we do things differently, it starts there, because we'll actually get to a point where we will have a data-driven decision-making process that has the justifiable data to make those proper changes. And everybody loves change, right? So when you go out and you change something, you need to be able to back it up with some piece of information and data. And so I think that's where it starts. In terms of how we can then use that information from either a planning perspective or a policy perspective, especially when you're in a jurisdiction that's interested in charging for the use of the curbside, that's where you can start to really expand the ability to be much more nimble and dynamic with even your curbside charging policies. And so if you have the data and information to say, okay, there's more individuals or more demand for cyclists or even transit or any other uses on this particular curb versus a freight use during a certain time of day, then you can make those dynamic changes, and you can then have your parking policies match up as well as your parking management systems match up to make sure that you're much more nimble, and you're then having the ability to really manage the curbside from a nimble standpoint. So there's so much utility to this. I think we're scratching the surface. But the people that are working on this every single day, that are charged from an operational perspective to manage this infrastructure, to have this platform on the public sector side is monumental. And then again, based on the fact that this is an API, they can be integrated with future dispatching systems on the freight side. That's where you start to actually see both sectors start to come together and kind of manage this long-standing issue around curbside management. So I think that this is really the catalyst to really transition the way we think about this moving forward.
I'll highlight a couple of the themes that have already been brought up and bring up one more. So right now in our downtown, we have bus-only lanes. And we have protected bike lanes. And we have a lot of struggling small businesses. And we have a lot of residents. And we have street sweepers and all of these things kind of running around. And all of them have claims to use of the curb. And there are multiple times a day where they conflict in a way that is detrimental to the public good. The local businesses have their deliveries happen whenever the damn trucks show up. And they park in the middle of the bus lane. And the enforcement of this is very minimal, and the information about it is very minimal. There's one sign every 2 to 3 blocks saying this is not supposed to be done, and what happens then is the bus pulls out and slows its route down around this truck. It impacts the bikes who are trying to get down this road. It impacts the driver who's trying to just get home, right? And what we're doing is rationalizing a very conflicted space. Now, right there, that is a huge improvement over what's happening today, if we can do that. Now, there's a lot of work to get there, right? This is a vision, right? But this is the system that allows us to do that, right? And I think that is just a kind of encapsulation of what was brought up. The other thing that we haven't talked about is by creating standards like this, the products that come to cities to be able to manage what they're doing improve a lot. And they improve because the basic intelligence of what Miami-Dade is solving becomes immediately communicable to the problems San Jose is solving, because in the standard itself is the different policy expressions and different approaches to the problems, right? They're coded, right? CDS is not a in stone written standard. It is managed very specifically as a dynamic, growing, maturing space that the Open Mobility Foundation kind of harnesses mostly a volunteer army of folks who work on this. And thank you to the public members and private members who spend a lot of time doing this, right? And so this is an incredible space where all of us, and this is literally around the world. This is being used in Europe already too, right? All of us are together solving a problem, right? And so we're able to communicate, and Ben was highlighting this, right? We're able to communicate the lessons from different places across the whole shared space of where this is being used. And that's really great for what cities can then do with it on the other end. And it then creates a space where businesses who support cities, right, in their parking management, curb management space can do that much better of a job and sell better products. And it kind of improves the whole ecosystem for everybody.
Thank you. We often talk a lot about kind of like what we're doing, how we're doing it, but it's nice to hear the kind of connection to the ultimate why. And that's sometimes hard in our space. You know, we're a nonprofit organization, so sometimes we'll be talking to a foundation, you know, for funding, and you know, the question ultimately comes down to, well, what does this mean for actual communities? What does this mean on the ground? And I think you've all painted a really good picture of how a data standard can actually be part of a public service in a way by increasing safety or access or equity. So. I always appreciate that connection. I think that's why we all do what we do at the end of the day. I do want to reserve a couple more minutes for questions. So if anyone has a question, I'll ask one more to our group, and then I'll hand it over. But this program, Irina. I'll get to you first, and then yeah. But this is a two-phase program, and so I just want to kind of preview to everyone what's next, like what happens after this first phase, and I don't know, what can the community of folks who are all working on this, not just the folks who are kind of receiving grant funding, but the whole community, what can we expect from what's next from the Smart Grant program?
Yeah, sure. There's a second stage of the program, and I think I mentioned eligible, the awardees will have an opportunity to apply. So you have to win a stage one. So the 59 awardees that were awarded have the opportunity to apply for stage two, $10 to $15 million or so. That program will start, or the opportunity to apply for stage two will start once these projects or the stage one projects are kicked off in earnest. We want to create both a collaborative ecosystem, which I think already exists in the curb management space, but we're going to have a collaborative ecosystem around a number of different use cases, while also, you know, acknowledging the fact that there are fixed resources that folks are competing for, and part of that is sort of collaboration and competition by design. We want to see successful projects run fast and succeed, and we recognize that other projects might operate a little more slowly, and so we want to create a pathway for everyone to succeed. But part of this program does have a down selection component to it as an intentional effort to support projects that are really demonstrating success locally. So I hope that the collaboration / competition is fruitful, and for the folks involved in the curb management space, there's already going to be these spillover benefits as one project succeeds, others will succeed, and we're going to make our best effort to help support that. But I think the bigger picture again is that a program like SMART is such a small fraction of the overall infrastructure law, and if we spend the entire innovation kind of energy and efforts focused on programs that are only explicitly dedicated to that, we'll have really lost the plot. And the broader opportunity is to think about the much, much more significant, many more zeros capital build projects that we have that engage directly with the digitization efforts that we're talking about here, ensuring that those two things are connected and that we're really building the infrastructure system of the future that can support generations to come. So we're excited to watch these projects grow and appreciate. I know there's a lot of partners in the crowd, so appreciate all the efforts that has gone into them.
Good afternoon, Irina Slivina from Blue Systems. Thank you for the shout out earlier, Eulois. My question was actually also about phase 2 of smart grants, and I wanted to ask both Eulois and Ramses, what is your vision? It was really interesting to hear your respective visions for phase 1 and how different and yet and somewhat similar your projects for MDS-based curb management. But what is going to happen next once the phase 1 is completed? Would you please share a little bit of your thoughts? You already touched on it a little bit, but wanted to hear more.
Yeah, I mean, for us, phase 2 application, our draft of what we are going to apply for is mostly the first grant really is our downtown, right, and creating the curb data for that. And then we are a 180 square mile city. With 2,600 miles of road, roughly. So there's a lot more city to go code. So it'll be that, but then it will be, what we want to spend phase 1 work on is figuring out which management questions we want to focus on. And so I kind of listed a bunch of them already, and right now we're trying to figure out, is it the private parking aspect that we want to focus on, or is it freight, or is it both, or which aspects of these do we want to really focus on? And we haven't decided just yet which ones we want to do. Did you want to follow up on what phase 2 might be for you?
Ditto. Yeah. So we're still trying to figure out phase 2. I think the NOFA will come out later this year. I think for our case, we're starting in a very specific area within downtown city of Miami. So ultimately, after we test out kind of that pilot phase, the whole idea is try to expand into other specific areas. So we'll once we see kind of the eligibility criteria for phase 2, we'll make the determination what we submit.
Hello, Maggie Fernandez, Miami-Dade County. Thank you. This is a great panel. Can you talk a little bit how you expect the smart grants are going to affect future policy, land use, zoning? Because if we keep building the way that we're building without thinking about this, we're never going to solve the problem, even though it's a hard problem to solve. But maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Density requires smarter management of transportation. It requires a much more articulated use of the right-of-way. Right? We need more people to fit in a smaller space, and we need a system that allows us to do that. So I think this kind of approach allows us to enable density. I know in San Jose we're fighting constantly. Like we're 180 square miles of 85% suburban homes, right? And we need to grow up. And convincing people that more density is going to still be okay to get around is actually pretty hard in our city. It's happening, but it's a lot of slog, right? And this is the kind of system that allows us to say, hey, look, we're managing this really well, right? You guys are seeing this. That's the statement we need to be able to make, right? And once we can make that, it creates that much more trust in the public's ability to create the services that are needed for land use to continue to densify and kind of solve those other environmental equity problems and all that kind of stuff that densification kind of helps us with. So that's one take on it.
And I would just add, from the federal government side, the Department of Transportation, Department of Energy released a transportation decarbonization blueprint. And obviously, like we actually didn't talk much about electrification, which is actually a component of this because of the curb usage for electric vehicles. Decarbonization is not only about electrifying transportation, and if you read the report, you'll see that a lot of energy is dedicated towards land use and towards mobility and creating opportunities really to build out systems that don't necessarily just sort of like update the past, but reimagine what our communities look like.
Thank you all so much. Hopefully our panelists will be around for just a couple more minutes in case you have any other questions. Otherwise, thank you so much for participating. Thanks so much for joining us. And I'm really excited to see what happens next in the curb management world.